has the conference ongoing? What are the current discussions?
It's going very well, very animated, very stimulating. Just the final presentation, plenary presentation yesterday on the first day, on Monday, was a conversation between the CNN Africa correspondent and President Ruto of Kenya. And he was stressing the need for funding to help Kenya mitigate the effects of climate change. And basically, his pitch was that we're all in this together. We have this massive problem, global problem. We have the resources. We have the physical resources to the commodities, as it were, to deal with the problem, but we don't have the financing. So he was asking the rest of the world to invest in green energy, to help Kenya economically, and of course, from his perspective, to help mitigate the effects of climate change. We'll have to see whether that was an effective presentation or not. But it just emphasizes the fact that, as you were suggesting in your introduction, we have senior heads of state. We have discussions on the most pressing issues. And as always, for investors, it's a matter of calibrating, where best to put their money. Many of them, I think, would like, on a personal level, to invest in all kinds of areas and markets, some of the new frontiers, some of the emerging markets, etc. But of course, it's a question of how much risk they're willing to tolerate. But I think it's interesting, it's fortuitous, perversely perhaps, for new frontier and emerging markets like Nigeria and like Kenya, in that the Western economic system and many of the specific Western economies are not as attractive as they were for all kinds of reasons. And therefore, they're greater risk to investing in the West, in America particularly. And as investors move out of America, move out of the West, they have to put their money somewhere. And therefore, although these emerging markets and these new frontier markets are still comparatively high risk, relative to the Western markets, that risk gap, isn't as great, I would suggest, as it was. And so I think that's a more accidental opportunity for emerging and frontier markets to make a strong and hopefully effective pitch, the kind of pitch that is being made here in Riyadh.
All right, proud to the kickoff of this conference, and even now there are broad concerns over security or escalating crisis in the Middle East, looking at the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. Talk to us if this has affected the participation of some investors or the attendance, or what might likely be the impact of this even after now.
Right. It's very interesting you raised that question, because there was a press conference by the president of the World Bank, and then, of course, as I mentioned, President Ruto's conversation with CNN. And in both cases, there was only time for one question from the press, and in both cases, the only question offered was a question about the Middle East and how it was affecting their particular portfolios. And so it is a very pressing concern. I mean, I've been talking with the organizers here, and they all said that they took a large intake of breath when, of course, the tragic situation began to unfold when Hamas attacked Israel recently. And they didn't know what would happen in terms of the conference, and obviously naturally feared that the timing was very poor. But I can report that the conference has survived, in fact, arguably thrived. There have been some individual speakers and delegates who, because of business pressures, in the sense of having to spend time focusing more on Middle East matters, whether they be political or whether they be investment finance based, have not been able to be here. But it's a very small number. Everyone has come. They've continued to actually draw in since the Israel-Hamas Gaza sort of tragedy unfolded. In the interim, they've continued to attract new and additional delegates. So the conference has not suffered at all. So that's sort of the numbers element of it. But in terms of the discussions and what is being said and what is being done, at the conference, it's just like everywhere else. I mean, whether I've been recently in North America or Europe, North Africa, it's front of mind for everyone. It's what everyone wants to talk about, whether they are directly involved in some way in terms of business or politics, media or not. It's just of great importance to everyone. And so I wouldn't say it's the elephant in the room. It's just something that everyone is aware of. Um, and so privately and publicly, it is part of the discussion in terms of obviously here it's about principally about the financial, business, economic impact, which the short answer is, of course, no one knows. And all people can do is look at economic and political history in the modern era and to try to draw lessons as to what's more or less likely to happen. But because it's an evolving real-time situation here in the Middle East, it of course is very hard to figure out what the next steps, what the next moves on the chessboard are going to be, and who eventually will be the winner, and what the knock-on ripples on the pond will be, what the negative and positive externalities, if there are any positive ones, will be economically. But it's something that it's one of those interjections or interventions that a major conference like this always has to be prepared to take on, which they have, and I think they've done as good a job as one could have hoped.
All right, you talked about investments around climate change and climate-friendly investment. Now, from what you've seen, with pitches been made by different financiers and even the participants, heads of state, CEOs, and other people who were there at the conference, does it look like Africa is well positioned to take advantage of investment opportunities in renewable energy?
Well, on paper, Africa is in a fantastic position from a pitch point of view, because, as the Kenyan president said, that is where the resources are. The problem is the lack of capital. And of course, the investment community, whether it's Asian or Western, to use two examples, there is a tremendous amount of personal interest in that particular issue. There's that emotional momentum behind some of these investment decisions or would-be decisions, and of course there is the potential for profit making, while the investors believe they're doing good through their investments. So that's what it looks like on paper. But if I may be completely frank with you, the African pitches that I have heard, the Kenyan president being a good example, I don't believe have been particularly effective. I think they're well-intentioned, they're sincere, but I believe there's a tremendous lack of, or a striking lack of strategic and tactical knowledge and expertise, communication skills, etc. So it's all there for Africa to tell a very good, strong, effective story to pull in significant green energy and blue economy investment from the outside world. But it has to be done well and effectively. And as I discussed with you yesterday, it's not simply a matter of do you do a good job pitching for investment, but it's not happening. Your pitch doesn't happen in a vacuum. The Kenyan pitch, the pitch from any of the other African countries isn't occurring in a vacuum. It's occurring simultaneous to other African countries also pitching. So although, as the Kenyan president said, we're all in this together in terms of the presumed problem, we're not all in it together in terms of where that money goes. The money goes country by country. And so Kenya and others really need to up their game, in my opinion, in terms of effective pitching. And I mean, I can't speak to whether they will succeed or not. I'm not privy to that information yet, even if if those decisions have been made, which they may well not have. But I suspect from what I observed and witnessed yesterday, and what I'm hearing privately since, is that Kenya and others, they really need some serious help if they're going to more effectively make the case that they are not the case that they need help, but the case that they should be the recipients of assistance in terms of direct financial investment.
All right. The theme of this year's forum is the new compass, Give us a background to this and how significant is the importance of having a kind of discussion around the new compass this time?
Yeah, well, there are different ways in which it's presented, in which it can be sort of looked at and addressed. But it's basically saying we need, if not a new roadmap, then perhaps you might say a new GPS system or a new MapQuest way of figuring out how best to get through down the path, around the challenges, over the hurdles that confront any economy, whether you look at it in terms of specific markets or you look at it in a more regional or continental or global sense, right? There are many challenges which are long-standing, historic challenges, but there are also newer challenges. The consequences of the COVID lockdowns, the supply chain issues, for example, the inflation that is eating away, the stunted economic growth we see, the challenges of the financial system. So how can we I think what I would stress about the new compass sort of mission is to sort of let's step back, step almost to the side, and try to look at the big picture with fresh eyes, look at it anew, and say, are we just approaching these problems in the best way, or are we simply doing what we always do? And I think whether it's the investors at this conference or it's politicians and governments around almost every country you care to name around the globe, what is clear is that doing the same old thing, surprise, surprise, produces the same old results. And those results just simply aren't good enough. They're not just unsatisfactory, but they're untenable for the taxpayers and consumers and citizens of so many countries right now, as much in the West as in the global South. So poorly have economies been run in so many Western countries in recent years. So can investors, but hopefully also stakeholders beyond the investment community, honestly look as independently and as objectively as possible at what is working, what isn't working, and what can be made of that. And so I think in terms of preliminary conclusions, there's a strong sense that as much as technology has been harnessed successfully, we need to do much more. We need to make sure, for example, that AI is channeled in a productive, positive way, given the fact that as any new technology, it can be used for ill and for good, that cryptocurrency has an appropriate role, and that these are both disruptive technologies, but a sense that disruption needs to be embraced, risk needs to be embraced. We need to increase our tolerance for risk, and in doing so, we can unleash, whether as individual economies or more globally, or at least regionally, we can unleash more of the creative juices that underpin and are the catalyst and the genesis of entrepreneurship, which is the driving force of in the long term, any really successful economy.
In this summit, you have high-profile asset managers. You have the Goldman Sachs, you have the JP Morgans and others. And a lot of them are also targeting the Saudi Arabia Sovereign Wealth Fund and also making pitches. What does it look like the new compass is directing global asset management to from the summit?
Well, back to the competitive word, it's a very competitive environment. And this is the thing, right? This is the notion behind this conference, is that there isn't a one size fits all solution, and that any new compass any new instrumentation that is unleashed or on the world is not going to be a program, a single solitary prescription, whereby the good and great people at this conference pronounce to the world everywhere that this is what you must do, this is what you should do, and this is exactly how you should do it. It's more a case of encouraging spontaneous activity, encouraging competition. The notion which economic history, I think, bears out that competition is what drives innovation and which drives progress and which drives ultimately better economic growth and rising living standards across the board. And so whether it's the pitching, whether it's those who have the funds who are looking to invest them, or those who are looking to receive those funds and make use of them, it's I think a positive competitive environment, if I put it like that, a recognition that in macro terms everyone's trying to achieve the same thing, but in micro terms, everyone needs to put their best foot forward, make their best case, because there's no guarantees in the business world that you are going to thrive, even perhaps survive, if you aren't constantly, on your game and on your toes. So again, it's not a bumper sticker type approach, but a sloganeering or bumper sticker soundbite type answer that I can provide. But I think that actually speaks well of the conference, because it's applying a more, I think, realistic, pragmatic, and nuanced, and more sophisticated approach than we see at many other major conferences. So as I say, it's less about telling the world what to do and more encouraging the world to think about how they're doing things and to maybe illustrate, use examples and case studies. There's incubation workshops going on here, angel investors, venture capitalists. There's opportunities for people to not just to pitch, but to learn from those on the receiving end of those pitches, what they need, what they're looking for, what works and what doesn't work. So it's very interactive, very inclusive. Everyone has an opportunity. Everyone is on the status of everyone within the venue is the same. It's sort of egalitarian and inclusive in that regard. And I think that's, no process is perfect, but there are fewer imperfections here, I think, than you find in many of comparable venues. And that's, again, to be commended and to be encouraged.